Hi dear students, you are welcome in this video. Dear students, we are making videos on language and its varieties. Today we are going to talk about dialectal variations. In some previous videos we also talked about what is dialect, its features, animal communication, human communication and features of language. Let's talk about dialectal variations because dialect is related to region and the social context. Hence it is important to understand the dialectal variations because there are different types of dialects we find in any language or in single language. If you take example of English has so many hundreds of dialects spoken around the world. If you go to Britain or England, we find there are different dialects. If we go to America, we also have different types of dialects there. And all these things we are going to study or discuss in this video. Before that, let's understand a few questions regarding this dialect and dialectal variations. So here we have very first question. As we can see, what are dialectal variations? Very first we are going to address this. What are dialectal variation? Then we have second question, what are regional variations, because it is important to understand the regional varieties of language. Then we will also talk about what is accent, because accent is an important term which is very crucial while discussing about dialect and its variations. Then we have what is difference between dialect and accent, and also we are going to cover a few other topics like isogloss or dialectal boundary in this video. And I also show you my research because I did a research on dialect, specifically on Marathi language or Marathi dialect. We will also discuss about that. So let's start with the concept of standard language, because we most of the times we find that speakers or the scholars talk about standard language, and what does this standard language mean by, or what are the components of this standard language, what is included there in the standard language is important. Standard language is nothing but the mainstream language, and we should call it as mainstream language because there are obvious reasons. When we call a language as standard language, we are differentiating the dialects from that language, and hence we are creating the superiority or inferiority regarding the language, or in the mind of speakers, that this type of dialect is inferior or this type of dialect is superior when we refer to the standard language. There is no any standard language according to the scholars. Here this distinction is made by George Yule, and this distinction appears in the study of language. Actually this is a very simple thing. Standard language, when we talk about it, refers to the print language very first, then it refers to the language taught in schools, or we use a particular language in the school, and there we find we have a particular grammar, vocabulary and all other things related to language, to which we call as a standard language, which is used in schools. And when we talk about English as second language, we are referring to this standard version of language. Then we also have the language of broadcast, which is also called as standard language, and whatever written or print form here we have, it is nothing but the standard language, or a language which is accepted by most of the people or most of the speakers of that particular language. But we should not call some language as standard or substandard, because it creates the superiority or inferiority complex in the mind of speakers. The very general word which I do use is mainstream language. If we are referring to English, we should refer to as mainstream English, or the English which is accepted by a lot of speakers or most of the speakers of that language, which is based on particular kind of rules and regulations. And sometimes this category or this type of distinction makes a language prestigious. When someone referring to standard language or standard English, he is referring to a prestigious kind of English or prestigious kind of language, and hence we should avoid using this standard word. Instead we can use as mainstream language, and it is accepted by many, and I personally use this word mainstream language. Whenever you are talking about a language, there are variations, there are dialects, there are differences in the speakers. When they speak a particular language, they have different types of accent, they have different types of vocabulary, their pronunciation is different, and based on this we cannot distinguish a language as superior language or inferior language or standard or substandard language. Hence we must consider all these things while talking about a language. So standard language is nothing but the mainstream language which is used by the most of the population of that particular language. Now let's understand the difference between accent and dialect. So accent is very particular, which is related to direct pronunciation, and it identifies region or social context. So this is what the accent. But when we talk about dialect has pronunciation one of the aspects. So dialect also is differed with pronunciation, but it is one of the aspects. And here accent is nothing but the pronunciation of a particular dialect by the speaker. Then we have one of the markers. Now when we talk about this dialect is nothing but one of the markers, and here it is region or included in the region or social context, means it gives identity to the speakers who is speaking that particular dialect with an accent or with a different pronunciation. So this is social context or regional context. Then we have no difference in grammar, vocabulary, syntax, etc. So this is a very crucial feature of the accent. And here we have grammar, vocabulary, syntax, etc. We find generally difference in dialects. Sometimes grammar may be different of the same language in dialect, or we have vocabulary, because we found that lexical borrowing is a feature of dialect, and hence dialect can differ in grammar, in vocabulary, in pronunciation. But here in accent we do not have any difference in the vocabulary or syntax or grammar. Here we have an example. This example is borrowed from Scottish English, and I try to read this example. I do not have the exact accent of this Scottish English, but I try to read it. Ye dinna wheat year have rin a boot. Now the meaning of this Scottish example is here the same. You don't know what are you talking about. So this is same here in general English, or here in Scottish English, or here in British English. So this type of difference we find in dialect and accent. Next, let's talk about the dialectal variations. Now these variations can be found on different levels, and here we have given some levels of this dialectal variations. Say for example, if we are referring to British English, American English, in America different types of dialects, in Britain different types of dialect, in England different types of dialect. Again, if we are referring to Indian English, we find Australian English, different types of Englishes or dialects of English. Now this difference can be found on these levels. Very first we have pronunciation. This difference can be found on pronunciation. Indian pronunciation of Indian speakers is different than the pronunciation of British speakers or American speakers. Then we also find vocabulary, because English is a language which borrowed so many terms from so many languages, and hence we find there is great difference in the vocabulary. If we are using, we are going to understand the example very minutely. Then we have again difference in grammar, difference in syntax, then idioms and expressions. Then we have lexical borrowings, means English borrows words from other languages or other dialects in the same region. Then we have pragmatics, means contextual meaning. So there may be difference in the pragmatics or pragmatic meaning or contextual meaning of the same word in different regions. Then we have diglossia. Now what is this diglossia? Diglossia is nothing but bilingual communities speaking different dialect at different situations. For example, if Indians are speaking English in the office, it is different, and if they are speaking the same language at their home, it is different. So this is called as diglossia, or bilingual communities generally have this feature of diglossia. Now, dear students, let's understand the different types of dialects of English. Now, you can see here the regions in different colors. Now, these regions speak different dialects. Here we have North Central dialect in this orange color. Then in red color we have Northern dialect, or we can say that a different type of dialect. Here you can see this red region. Then again we have green region. In the green region we have Midland dialect. Then we have southern region. Again it is in red area, and this red area marks the southern dialect. Then we have western dialect with this blue area, and again here we have sky blue area, and in sky blue area we have northern New England, or this type of dialect. And again here we have New York City dialect in this area. So this is the different types of dialects spoken in America or United States. Let's understand this example in case of England or Britain. Here we have different dialects in these different regions with different colors. We have Scottish dialect, we have North dialect, then we have Midlands dialect, then we have East Angelina, South dialect, West Country dialect, Wales and Isle of Man dialect, and this Irish dialect. So these colors represent different types of dialects in Britain or in England, and these dialects have the features which we have discussed before, that their pronunciation is different, vocabulary is different, syntax is different. Then we have diglossia, then we have different types of lexical borrowings from these areas. Say for example, in this area different types of words can be borrowed in this blue area. So this type of we can say confluence is found in the language or in dialect. Now let's understand this with an example. Here we have two terms, isogloss and dialect boundaries. Now we will understand this isogloss and dialect boundaries with the help of these examples. Now these examples directly state that these isogloss are nothing but the boundary. Here you can see this is a boundary marker, and in this boundary we found that two regions are distinguished, or they are divided. Now here we have this plus signs. This plus signs states, let's for example these two words, paper bag and second is paper sack. Now in northern part of this area we find this word paper bag, which is marked as star. So here we have the word paper bag in this area, and in this area we have the word paper sack. So this is paper sack. Now we have this boundary, and this boundary or this line is called as isogloss. This is nothing but isogloss. When this isogloss is confirmed and it becomes thick, or it becomes a vivid line, then it is called as boundary. Now it becomes the boundary between these two regions where we find the difference in vocabulary. There is difference in pronunciation obviously, but again the difference in vocabulary also found, because here we have two words. In northern area we find this paper bag word is used, and in Midland we find the word paper sack is used to bring the groceries at home. So this difference is very important to mark this boundary, and this boundary states that there are difference in the dialects. The northern dialect is different and Midland dialect is different. So here we have different regions, for example North Dakota, then Minnesota, then we have Iowa region, Nebraska and South Dakota. Now here we have a few examples through which we can understand how pronunciation vocabulary is different in these regions. Here we have northern area and Midland area, and here we have a word called tot. Now this tot word is used in northern area as tot. A sound here we find strongly used, and in Midland a sound is used. Here we can understand, means it's not pronounced as tot but tat, it's tat. Then we have the word roof. We have here the oo sound, and here longer oo sound, short oo sound and longer oo sound. Roof and roof, roof, roof. Then we have creek, creek, long e and short e. Creek, 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 creek. this type of words are used. Then we have greasy or greasy. Now s sound is used here in northern area, and in midland we found z sound, means greasy and greasy. Then we have these words, the difference in the vocabulary. Here the pail word is used here in northern area and bucket used in midland area. Then we have kerosene in northern and coal oil in midland. Slippery in northern area and slick in we can find midland. Then get sick and take sick. Now this kind of difference is found in the vocabulary and pronunciation in different types of areas. So this is the dialectal variation in different areas. So this kind of dialectal variation can be found not only in America or Britain, but in India, Australia and other countries where English is spoken. Now let me show you, I did a research on the preservation of endangered living dialectical words of Marathi spoken in Hingoli district, and I have submitted this minor research project in March 2022 to the Swami Ramanand Tirth Marathwada University, Nanded, and this is the area of my study where I studied dialects. How dialect of Marathi is there inherent in this area, and what kind of features of this dialect, and how dialectical words are endangered and how they are vanishing away. And I tried to list all those words in this thesis or in this report. So here you can see this is the Hingoli district, this is Maharashtra, and this is Hingoli and adjacent districts to the Hingoli. What I did in this research, it's a very simple kind of thing I did. I listed all the words of dialectical Marathi which are spoken in this particular area, and here you can find these words are taken on three levels. Very first is dialectical word, then mainstream Marathi word you can find. I am not using the word standard but mainstream Marathi, then meaning in English is given. So these three layers you can find in this research. Now let's take an example of the very word adkita. Here we have adkita is nothing but supari kapnyache sadhan, and in English it is rendered as a tool having a pair of blades used to crack the nut. And here you can see the object or the we can say that this is the adkita, or that instrument or tool which is used to crack the nut. This is called adkita. There are so many words. For example, another word is anarase. Anarase is nothing but a sweet food item made up of rice flour, milk and sugar. Here you can find the meaning, and here this is anarase, and this item is included here. So this type of things I have included in the minor research project. So it is very important when a generation is not speaking those words, the probability is that those words will be vanished from that language and from that dialect, and dialect strengthens the main language or the mainstream language, to which we call as standard language. But again, I request or appeal to all of you, do not use the word standard, instead use the mainstream language or mainstream dialect or mainstream we can say English, so that we can understand the very roots of this language, and roots of this mainstream language goes to the dialect. And this is the research. I hope you understand this research and dialectical variations. If you have any problem, any query, you can comment below in the comment section. We will understand and I will try to solve your queries. Thank you very much. Let's meet in the next video.